Hi, my name's Robert Miller. I'm the director here at Rio Hondo College Gallery, and I'm very fortunate to have with me in the gallery Max Presneill with his solo show here, In Case of Emergency. Now, I'd like to start this a little different because normally we just talk about paintings, and part of the outreach and part of what I want to do with today, with this show especially, is I've been fortunate enough to know Max for at least, 25 years?
About 25.
25 years. So when Max first came over from England, I had a gallery on the west side. It might have even been Miller Fine Art before it was Miller Durazo. I'm not sure which one you actually showed
Miller
with.
Durazo.
Miller Durazo. So me and my business partner, Martin, and I met him, and Max showed with us in different shows. And it's been really a wonderful experience watching Max's career grow and sort of his outreach to the LA art community. And part of that, I want to mention a couple fun events that sort of I followed through the years in LA that I've been so amazed. One of the things he created was a really exciting alternative gallery for a lot of upcoming young artists, raid projects. In the brewery complex, I believe.
Originally it was in Santa Ana, but we moved to the brewery soon after we opened.
And about how many years was it open?
10.
10 years. So that's, for a space, quite a huge ordeal. That's a big lifespan for a space. Then you also did some amazing projects such as Mass Attack, where I believe 13 of them happened.
Yeah.
And a lot of them started in LA, but you start to branch out to Vegas, San Diego, all sorts of locations. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe to merge like the LA art community with the Vegas art community, with the San Diego art community, and up to 350 artists would participate in these shows, which is just an incredible get together, and the emerging of ideas and the relationships built really changed a lot of, artists and their relationships.
It was a one-night event, so that meant everybody had to use that short amount of time to get to know each other, work together. Everything happened in one day, and it was taken down. Each of those shows was taken down at the end of the night, and people went home with their work.
So they installed and took down.
We installed, they took down.
So the amount of work that must have been, the undertaking, huge.
We had a team of people that helped, and Keir Griffiths and Colin Stenke were my partners in that. So there was a team of us, plus all these generous helpers that made that possible.
And I know I participated in one or two of them, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful event. And I always loved the opportunity, even myself as an artist and curator, to see that many artists and get to know so many, new artists and their work. And, I'd like to thank you for that. Other projects you did, we have like Raid, Mass Attack. You're involved with Durden and Ray as well.
I am.
Which, a little bit about that,
It's
the difference between Raid and Durden and Ray.
Well, Raid Projects was actually curated shows with a kind of emphasis a lot on establishing exchange shows with other countries, bringing artists from other countries to LA. Durden and Ray is a collaborative artists group that act as curators. So the group are all practicing artists, and they put together shows, and a lot of those are international exchange shows where we're taking LA artists to other countries and then bringing artists into LA. And that's kind of a big focus for Durden and Ray.
Yeah, that's quite a lot. You also did the C Lab? Collab, yes. And you ran that 2011, 2012, I believe.
Yeah.
Now, was that where Mass Attack came versus, or were they, it sounds...
I don't remember which came first.
Which they were huge. For people who don't know what that is, I encourage you to Google it. These huge events where people had the opportunity, where a lot of art fairs. I mean, it was very much like an art fair.
It was exactly like, we even had booths. It was an art fair, but for alternative spaces, and it was free to the participants. Everything was done on a volunteer basis. Everything.
That's pretty incredible. And for those of you out there, to get that opportunity and get that experience, for people who want to curate and do that, to get a free booth, this, what a great opportunity. And, people don't realize the undertaking and to get the space and insurance and to set up these booths that is. And so I'm bringing this up because before we get into the show, in case of emergency, especially when I talk about your work, so much of it is influenced by your life and what you do. I think these things are important. A lot of times they don't get talked about during interviews, but in this case, I really do think, me, work is so much about you and your life that all these things you do, for me, influences the work. So for our audience who don't know you as well, I think it's really important for them to start getting it helps get the vibe of Max.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's a little bit about you. So you originally went to school in England, so Sheffield, then Bolton, and then you wound up here. Now you got several degrees in England. Three in England?
Degrees, 2 of them are postgrads.
So 2 postgrads, so 3 degrees. Now you came here and you started to work. I know I showed you at our gallery back in the day, but then you decided to go back to school and get a master's degree.
MFA,
at Cal State Fullerton. What, as a showing artist and already kind of successful, we'll say right off the boat, what made you decide to go back and say, I want to go get another master's degree?
Some life changes. It was a big move coming to America, and I really wanted a American university experience. And some changes that came about in my life that gave me the opportunity to do that. So I followed it. It was a whim and an urge more than anything else.
Did you find it helped your career to have we'll say an American degree versus the British degrees that collectors or buyers looked at it different, or it just didn't really?
It helped in getting teaching gigs, because I was teaching at universities here for a while, and that it helped in that sense, but not for anything else, I don't think.
Oh, good. Well, that's, fair enough. So now with this show, in case of emergency, we can start going in this, and I'll go back and forth and talk to this. Really, there's what I see in your art, and when I look at your art, knowing you, you're, for years you were into skateboarding, and definitely being in a bike club is a big part of your life. I always ask you, and I always think this is important, being a museum curator at the Torrance Museum, how that affects, just being a painter or a curator. And a lot of people struggle balancing the two worlds, because we talk a little bit about this. When you see so much art and you're like, oh, this could be done, but it can sometimes hurt your art too, or be difficult. I always see, your work almost not only as you, but this statement on class systems. Kind of this there's this subculture that creeps into your paintings.
Sure.
It's not just painting. You're using, I would have trouble class. Right, it's everything. I was telling somebody today, it's the kitchen sink is in there. There's mixed medium. You're putting pieces through the painting. You have stickers, you have patches, you have like the skull, almost jewelry. We were talking about this earlier on some of the pieces, and we'll go around and talk about them in some of your motorcycle gear is in them, and it brings in, at least to me, I was talking about, and I don't know how you feel about this, I'm like, your DNA's in that. There is anybody who rides bikes or stuff, those gloves really are you. Your helmet has a special quality to it,
Yeah.
you know.
I think that there's several ways of taking these influences that become very apparent very quickly. Number one, as a curator, your job is to find this kind of diverse body of works that are out there, and then you bring them together. And so there's a groupings of gestures, marks, images, objects that come together within the frame of the painting, which is similar to organising an exhibition in a space. You bring these things in. So I think they are deliberately a kind of toolbox of mark making, looking for a very, very kind of diverse set of marks, but at the same time keeping them within a kind of a set of motifs that try and slowly mutate in some way or change, or at least become self-reflexive about, so that there's an awareness that to make a gestural mark has implications in the history of painting about freedom and autonomy, etc., which one might question whether those things exist in reality, and then I can do that visually by referencing ways of things becoming in quotes through comic books. As an example, the quote of the thought bubbles, except in speech bubbles.
Maybe, Grant, could you pull up?
There's one there. Yeah, there's one there on the right-hand side with the blue marks. They just have that blue mark underlining it on the right-hand side. It's a quotation mark in the comics used for the speech bubbles. You talk about influences. I started off making art by copying comic books. And then over the years, you get interested in art and follow certain artists and kind of really try and learn as much as one can. But at some point, artwork has to become your own. And the way that I try and do that is by throwing in all those things that are the conversations I'm having with the art world, but also the conversations I'm having in my life. And so these elements will become, they can come from art history, but they can equally have come from things that reference into the bike club. So chosen few, if anybody's there. There's also things to do with skateboarding, the mod movement in England, which I grew up partly in and still am connected to through one of my brothers and some friends. There's all these kind of elements, they become important signifiers of bigger issues in one's life. The idea of what mod might mean and how it might be interpreted. Even skateboarding as a kind of a growth of rebellion in some ways, and then its dissolution through commercialization, if one reads it that way. But I do think that you can kind of track not only one's own histories, but you can kind of see in subcultures references to bigger ideas, either philosophical and conceptual, but also political. There are enough books out there that are to do with subcultures, which I think are really interesting in terms of reading things like these paintings. They can be read through that lens very easily.
Is there your favorite book that you would like let students that kind of influenced you on that may have changed, that may have sort of impacted these paintings?
I think the books that influenced me most probably nothing to do with art. I mean, outside of some reading about painting and that kind of thing, but I think there are. I read Dune or Dune, as you guys, whatever, and I read that, and its ideas about about seeing history as this epic scope over time through all the books, and that kind of urge to power, those kind of things, that really influenced my work. I think movies, Blade Runner, there's The Outsiders, Rumblefish is a huge influence in my painting, and there are elements in those that I use on a regular basis. I think if you were to look through my work over 20, 30 years, you'd see recurring themes like the Siamese fighting fish that would crop up over and over again, which is a Rumblefish reference. I did a 60 painting series, I think, which were all called Replicant 1, 2, 3, from Blade Runner. These kind of ideas are things that are influential enough, but that they never disappeared, and they constantly somehow resurface, and they resurface hand in hand with, the reference points to the Chosen Few Motorcycle Club, to the Northern Soul music scene, which I'm very much a part of and have been since the late 70s. There are all of these aspects, and I think that the paintings are a jumble of all these things. And when they're on the surface, of course, they're both independent entities. They're signs of presence. They are groupings of individuals in some ways, and they have their own histories. But one has to read them in the community in which they're part of the picture plane. And I see that as being an analogy for the art world, for the club world, for all of these kind of worlds exist in this interconnection of different people and things, but they exist independently in some kind of existential way. They still are themselves. They're born alone, they'll die alone, even within this soup of interaction.
That's a lot. Oh my God.
We're getting questions, I guess.
Yes, we are. Positions surrounded by aids and expressions of contained energy. Is there something dramatic about your painting? Interesting.
I could tell you just while you're kind of reading that, what's something interesting that was recently, is these larger paintings now have these bands of color on either side, and they came about because I posted a couple of these paintings on Facebook, and a friend of mine, an artist, Bill Dambrova, had seen them. He said, I really like the bands of color on the side. And I was like, what bands of color? There isn't any. So he sent me an image, which was what Facebook had done to it, is put it on a horizontal, because painting was vertical, but it put it onto a horizontal, and it filled in these color bands on either side to be able to do that. So he sent some images to me. I really thought that was interesting because of Facebook altering my artwork without any kind of permissions, and it became this much more poppy-looking object, but it also compressed and imprisoned the painting. And I really like this idea that not only does these things happen by companies, corporations, etc., out there in the world that change things, but I like this kind of compression. And so these ones here, the middle sections of these are my standard size of a painting, which is 72 inches by 60 inches, just with the added bands on either side. So I'm running with this at the moment, kind of thinking my way through this idea of a constricted bandwidth that's being given to me or allowed by Facebook or any other company that might be using the image.
Well, that was one of the things we talked about, and I really kind of found interesting how you were open, not just to you talked about some of your early influences, but kind of how outside society. I mean, you told me another story about painting that's not actually here, but how your relationship with another artist had influenced. Can you go into that?
Yeah.
It's a great story how.
Yeah, I posted an image of an 8 foot by 8 foot painting onto Instagram, and a friend of mine, Tom Dunn, who's an Australian painter, had sent the image back with his signature on it, and I thought it was hilarious that he'd done that, and it was, but it's also it's very sweet that he would kind of the implied I don't know, the way that he liked the painting anyway. So I wrote LOLXXX because it's on the phone, and that's what you use, these short forms of text. And I sent it back to him, and I thought, wait a minute, I was going to send it back to him, and I thought, no, that is part of the development of the painting, is part of this interaction, this awareness that the paintings are always in flux like this. So I painted on the painting LOLXXX, took a photograph of it, and then sent it back to him. So the final painting is my response to his Instagram sending as a compliment. Which I enjoyed this kind of interaction.
I thought that was a great story, and one of the things we talked about when we were hanging the show is that I really found interesting. You were still changing the paintings. That a lot of people, it's done, it's finished. That you were talking to me, and if you talk a little bit about your philosophy behind it, like you're like the painting's not done.
They're never finished. They will always. I will always see them as a potential for mutation. In the same way as I am. I mean, if they're in this reflection, they change, their needs change to me as I change. So I can look at them. There's rarely a painting that I think, a year or two later. And in my studio, what I do is I have stages. I paint something, I remove it, I look at it for a while, and most time it goes back into the studio and then back to viewing and studio viewing and studio viewing. Once it gets to a point where I can't see any more needs to it, it goes into storage, and then about every twice a year I go down into storage, take all the paintings out that I think need to be updated in some ways, and bring them back. And this is all part of a way of seeing that paintings they're not luxury items to me, they are reflections of a process of thinking and being. And so they're there as a reflection of that, but as things change, so can they. And I mean, some of those things have also, I had a conversation with an artist named Mark Dutcher, about the use of Instagram to show images that painters were starting to use, make images so they would work on media. And so my response to that was to, whenever I take a photograph, including things that are in magazines and books, I then alter the painting. It can be very subtle, sometimes it's not at all subtle, so that the painting that does exist in the world is never the image. The image is a separate object, as it were, from the painting, and they will continue to grow. I mean, so if somebody asks me, and this happens quite a lot, how long do they take to paint? The initial painting might take 3 weeks. Could be as short as that. The painting to be painted paintings for 15 years, 20 years. I actually have some that have been painted over continuously for 12 to 20 years.
Now, on those lines, and we have a lot of students and artists viewing, and it's always interested in. When we were installing, we had a wonderful chat, and I really appreciate your time. I really enjoyed hearing your take because I was asking you questions like, that always as the artist versus the gallerist, I was saying, what about the archival issues? And we talked and you were saying like some of the beautiful, I like some of the underpainting, especially in the yellow. And you were telling me how you made that. Can you?
Oh yeah, paintings, obviously, they're physical material, they're the paint itself, but they're a conceptual approach to something. And so I start by grabbing canvas and going outside my house, my studio, and laying them on the street, on the tarmac, and getting on my hands and knees or shuffling around on my feet to dirty them. And so they pull up marks from the tarmac, the dirt, the oil, whatever. Then they get stretched and sealed with a transparent sealant. And then I throw motor oil and tea and wine, bourbon, anything that relates to the bikes or drinking, because I drink, and all this kind of stuff goes onto the surface to mess it up a bit. And then then it might be some paint gets thrown around, and then I start that process when that's all dry of painting properly, getting on there and really start to make marks, and it takes on a second life at that point.
Now, when we talk about this, and I talked about your work, and you're adding, I could see everything from stickers to, I called it kind of jewelry. You have sort of the biker's skull to patches to, the warning. If we could go, Grant, please, to the green one. There's even above it, I don't know if it's in the image, there's a security camera next to it. You have, the police tape, and, I said, well, how are you dealing? Obviously, we should bring it up, you're represented by a gallery in Los Angeles, Patrick Painter, one of the great galleries. I've been a big fan forever. Yuko, who love to death in Japan. Some of the other you show internationally.
Yeah, I'm with TW Fine Art in Brisbane, Australia.
So, you have all these galleries and you're shipping this work, around the world. And I always say sometimes it can be difficult with collectors or gallerists, on mixing different medias together and what is the life or archival, and should it really matter? And you had a great take on whether it should really matter or not.
My job isn't as a conservator. My job is as an artist, and so I need to make the work that I need to make with the materials that I need to make it with, and I am not going to personally get involved in the conversation with the collector of the future. It's not my job, and I really don't care. I need to do what I am, and particularly when I made a decision to include some of these materials that are from real life. The stickers and all the collage elements are bringing those elements from the real life into the painting life. And I think, this is, Picasso did this. We're in, the turn of the century. I mean, this is part of that whole collage development. But I kind of like the idea of, instead of trying to paint the patches from a motorcycle club, I'm going to stick the motorcycle club patches on it.
Right. Most artists, like the Trump Boy, they do the reproduction, how close can I get it? One of the things I found really exciting was you just kind of said, screw that, why? And I'm gonna put the actual, whether on the one behind you, the green one, you actually have a keyboard.
Yeah.
In a sense on that. The influence, that creeps in from your Viking influence, but there's a strong sense of line and color. How are you choosing? I mean, you're using this very kind of powerful, bold stroke and color.
The colors, the process of making it is very intuitive. When I consider that as a general rule, I see them as conceptual objects, a kind of reflection of thought patterns and decisions. But the making of them is very intuitive. I assess the stages that I go through and the things that I do to them in terms of color theory, and how does one give what I call bite? Because it's very easy to be lulled into making a beautiful painting. But the best painting for me are the paintings that upset and jar good taste and upset and jar your own expectations. I want every single painting I ever make to surprise me, to teach me something I didn't know beforehand. So I see something in it that now that's added to my toolbox, that any easy answers and to decisions that I make can be dislocated somewhat so that the unexpected can occur. I guess my aim in some ways, I want it to have that raw bite that makes it a kind of a harder core painting. But I also want to be able to look at them a month after they're painting, 10 years after I've painted them, and they still surprise me. And to get one's mental framework into a position to be able to paint so that you can surprise yourself, that you're not relying on the same old tropes, the same ways that you know how to do something. Although I have recurring motifs constantly, within that limited set of those, how many ways can I explore how to use them? It's both constricting and freeing. Constricting because there's a set language, and freeing because I can try as many different things as I can with them. And that, to try and find the balance of that dichotomy between these kind of urges and still make them powerful, bold, and disquieting somehow is the aim. I want to look at them and kind of not recognize them a year from now. I mean, I know I painted it, but I don't. It's separated from me now, has this independent life because odd decisions were made.
Now, you've been talking a lot about sort of what goes in from you into your work, and how do you think the viewer response? What do you expect the viewer to sort of take away? I mean, you put so much in and so much of you in. I mean, you were saying earlier, you totally, when I was saying almost, these anarchist sort of class, rebellion against class structure paintings, but they're quite beautiful at the same time. But, at least for me, I mean, I find them, very compelling. I hate to use there's a lot of sort of hardcore done, almost sneaky, that most people might not get, especially a lot of the 1%, or that it's done in a very kind of unique way and maybe the mainstream viewer just won't get it or might get it. How do you want
Okay,
it?
so the basic mark, that kind of up and down mark, that mutated into this kind of mark, and then mutated again, etc. That came out of the idea of a signature from graffiti, not graffiti art, but somebody scrawling their name on the back of a bus seat because it's important to leave a mark. And these are a set of marks of presence. I'm here, I'm alive, listen, I'm here, listen. And it came out partly because I'm a working class guy, and I remember being a teenager, young guy, running around in London and south of England, and my mates were often builders, and every time you'd go by some wall, one of my mates, like Mark Hadley, would say, "I built that wall," and it was important to him. And it was important that those guys would come to where I had my studio, where I was living at the time, and we'd have these discussions. And how do you tell them about this? Well, I tell them, that wall you built, this is my wall. This is a mark of me being alive. This is a mark of me being alive. This is a mark of me being alive that's enclosed and imprisoned. Here's another one that's enclosed and imprisoned. They get that. And I think that if people allow themselves to kind of go, well, that could be and could be and could be and could be, they'll get meaning from it. How much meaning will depend on how much knowledge they have about an assortment of things, like the Bike Club, like art history. The paintings originated when I first started being serious as a painter. In the question is, how does anyone understand what they know, and why? What is it they don't know, and why? And so it became apparent very quickly that this is about language games. I was interested in Wittgenstein's language game theories about how we understand things in the world, and how language is a very important part of understanding the world. So, painting is a language. The way that one puts paint with a brush onto a canvas is a language. And so there are messages in there, if you like, about the history of painting, which you need to know about painting to know. But everybody understands a scrawl, a doodle, the kind of thing they sit and do next to their phone, when they're just sitting there sometimes. What I'm doing, I think, is taking some of those marks and investing them with bigger meanings. The ideas of presence. And the reason why presence is important is because presence is the awareness that at one point you will no longer be present. You are going to die. Mortality is a given. It's the only thing we all absolutely share without question. And so the work has always been about making these statements of being alive, knowing they're going to end. And so, they continuously restate, otherwise. And somebody once said, well, why aren't they all dark and somber? Because it's such a serious subject. And my response is, because I'm going to scream and shout and dance and party while I still have it, when I have that life. Because, that then soon enough, it'll be an awfully long time of nothing forever, because I'm an atheist. I don't think there's anything afterwards. And so they are a joyful, if melancholic, response to that awareness.
Now, it's been exciting over the 25 years knowing you to see your work change. You weren't always sort of this abstract, painter. You were actually trained, if I'm correct. You took a lot of illustration classes. You were more of a realist painter.
I've gone backwards and forwards between the two, and often both at the same time. If you look, this painting behind you, can we get that one? I've gone from majorly being an abstract painter to figurative work to abstract, and then in between there's these transitional periods where it's kind of both. And if you look on the right-hand side, there's the outline of a raven in the middle there on the right-hand side. These things creep up and creep back into the paintings on a regular basis. There isn't a law, even in the art world, saying thou shalt paint abstract or thou shalt paint figurative and never in
well,
between.
there can be, and I've sat on committees
that's not gonna happen
and grants where they're like, literally, we don't want to give a grant to somebody who is too much of a realism painting.
Sure.
Sorry, I fought for you.
I've been on those panels myself, and I agree with you. It should be anything and everything as long as it's interesting and really grabs the attention and engages. I mean, I don't really care. I happen to be making abstract paintings because I was led back into abstraction because people were getting caught up in the discussions about the figurative elements I was using. Well, who are they? Where are they from? What's it? And they were only there as ciphers to talk about the passing of time, political agenda type things. And I didn't want the narrative to be a illustrational narrative. I wanted it to be about the process, and to go into the process as being about being alive. There's only one way to live a life, and that's to live it. There's only one way to talk about that. Well, there's not, but for me, I wanted the paintings to be this lived, performative experience. There's an experience of actually making it and engaging and putting this together. And the focus then returns to the idea of the mark as a genuine, like from the cave paintings where people used to put their handprints, all from that tradition all the way down, we follow a similar lineage through this kind of abstraction, I think. And so I decided, and I moved away from the figurative elements so that the conversations weren't being upended just by the illustrational response. Because of course, human beings are pattern recognizing animals and will search for those kind of answers.
Couldn't you get some of that similar kind of vibe or question? I mean, when I see maybe because I recognize it, now I love the cameras on top and that, we'll talk about that in a second, but especially with something so powerful as like the 1%er or the biker's patch, the actual patches, or the motorcycle gloves, certain things that can bring such a strong response, very similar with that. Different kind of, almost the same question, just a different.
Well, the code, because if you see the diamond shape, it has ways of referencing different aspects of Bike Club, but it's not a direct patch from my club because that would be disrespectful. We don't use direct patches and things from the club on anything else. And so I had to find ways to address ideas within the club in a generalized term and maybe use color as an example as a specific, but as you can see from the one behind, it has certain colors on there. It references aspects of my club, but it also references the codified world of clubs in general, that the diamond has meaning, that there's such an entire subculture that is only accessible through layers of meaning and experience, because you can watch Sons of Anarchy all day, that'll never tell you anything about what it's like to be in the chosen few.
Right. Now, part of that, and that's such a big part of your life, and you bring all this, I knew you when you were a crazy skater and all that, you bring this all this kind of excitement. I mean, people ask me about your work, I kind of say, well, it sort of is Max in a sense, that you bring in so much of your life in it. How does the club respond to you being, people may not realize it's a very diverse club. It's not what most people would assume that's very important and important to understand.
It's the oldest and probably biggest multiracial club, 1%er club in the country.
And that really is important too, that it's a very unusual being so diverse, but you know, being a painter and being accepted in a club like that, mm-hmm. Yes, it is diverse and stuff, but these are, in general,
I think there's a couple of things. People underestimate people out there in the world in general, particularly the art world. There's this thinking that everyone else just doesn't, can't possibly understand. And there's also this a misunderstanding because I don't think that most people realise just how creative people in bike clubs are with other aspects. They make leather goods. They make customise their bikes. And in my experience, most of them are really, really open to, people doing whatever they do. It really doesn't matter because who you are and what you do for the club is completely different and separate. But there's a real, as from my experience, there's a real openness and enjoyment in creativity. And so I expect there's a fair number of them watching today, I hope. My experience with it has been super, super supportive.
That's pretty exciting, amazing, and it's important for people to see because we all bring our bias to these
Sure.
things. And I always say, you're such an eclectic guy, and it's so neat. You're a museum director, you're a successful painter, you do all this kind of, philanthropy where you're helping so many artists in the art community out. It's pretty amazing. Now, I haven't been doing my job right, and I apologize because there's pop-up questions that I missed. They're now handing them to me really big, so that as I go blind, I can actually read them. So this is a great one. Color is a key part of your work. Would you call yourself a colorist?
I don't think that anybody that uses paint isn't a colorist, because even somebody using black, white, and red is using colors, and they're using it in a way that suits whatever their aims are. I personally have always been really attracted to bright colors. I used to pick up bubblegum wrappers because they were pretty colors. Still might do it even today if it's interesting colors. And it seems to me that one of the key tools in the toolbox of painting is color. That also means, of course, that they can be seen somewhat crass, and certainly unsophisticated in terms, in some people's terms, which is it's quite deliberate. But color really makes a significant contribution to why I love being in the studio.
Very cool. Once a painting has been in an exhibition, so now you might be in a catalog for this show, you did your exhibition, will you leave the painting as is, or are you willing to work on
it's
it?
Going to get worked on again.
So
absolutely.
It's always in play.
Always in play. The only time that it's not in play is when collectors buy them and take them away from me. That's it. That is the only time they're not in play.
Have you ever asked a collector for a painting back and say, I need to do something, that there's something that I want that
once it's removed from my orbit, that's it. Although if a collector ever came to me and said, would you update it, I would absolutely update it. So anybody has one, bring it back around and I'll do something to it.
Oh, that's neat, because that's so rare. Like an artist, like, hey, I want to update your painting, kind of like new software for a car. Like it's gonna change, and something for me, maybe having a gallery for so long. One of the things I really enjoy about your paintings is a lot of times, I don't know if this is something that affects you. When I hang a show, there's always a favorite or two.
Sure.
But usually by the end of the show, that you grow with. I mean, this is a sort of, for those of you out there, it's usually there's sort of that flash, that easiness of that painting. But as I lived with the painting, even work I have at my house, that I find that certain ones, it changes, certain ones they grow with me. I learn from the painting. I see marks, or you have so much there that I didn't see before in that.
There's a curator here in LA, Carl Berg, I'm sure a lot of people here know. I think the most influential thing, and he taught me a fair bit over the years, I think the most influential thing he ever kind of told me was that, he didn't put it this way, but I'll boil it all down, was that it's really easy to become infatuated with an artwork very quickly, but it's the ones that cause a kind of really disquieting unease within you that you can grow to love. Because the ones you are infatuated with will drop by the wayside and you'll forget about them and pass them by relatively quickly. but all the artworks that I truly, truly, deeply love from other artists, they normally mostly cause me some kind of disquiet when I first engaged with them. And I think you look deliberately in looking at other people's work as a curator, you look for those disquieting moments, those whatever it is about certain artworks that expand your own parameters, and that's uncomfortable. And so you're looking for that push against your own aesthetics. And I think that you can do that deliberately in your own work as an artist. You push those aesthetics so that your boundaries get further and further out. It gives you more room, more things to enjoy.
Now, we're talking about boundaries and aesthetics. We're here during COVID time. Got to ask the COVID question. I have so many friends, I always say, the correct statement seems to be like, oh my God, during lockdown, you have all this free time. Are you making work? And so many of my artist friends are going, I just can't. They're stuck. You've always been very prolific in the amount of work you make. I mean, example, how many paintings do you think you make in a year?
Oh, I don't know, hundreds.
Most artists, make.
That's from little things as well.
Does it? But I mean, that's really incredible for our viewers. Out of those hundreds, how many what would you consider your percentage of these are the ones I want to keep and these are like, what did I make?
1 in 10. I mean, most of them will you paint and then I'll paint and I'll repaint and I'll repaint, and they'll be going, there's a pile of them that will be ongoing for as long as it takes for them to come out of that process. In terms of the ones that, at the end of a year, the one, if I was to say, we'll move into the next year as solid works that I think were influential and important for me, maybe 10, 15, maybe.
So you'll make, let's say, we'll use 100 as an example, 10 come up. And I think that's really important for a lot of, artists that are kind of trying to figure it out. I talk to students about, I make and destroy a lot of work, that it's not, everything can't be precious.
Well, they need to understand they're not making art with a capital A, for a start. You're making art and it's a process. And you shouldn't be looking for success and a style, for instance. Your style comes when you've made enough work that you're not relying on other people's styles anymore. But I think through that process of, as long as you keep in mind that everything is an experiment, everything is an experiment, that gives you a certain amount of freedom, and it takes off the pressure to get something right. Because I have no expectations that any of them will be right, which is why this process of remaking them can go on for so long, because they're just temporarily halted. And you learn what you can from them, and then you can put it away for a little while, and you come back to it and take what you've learned from that into the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And I think it's really important, particularly for students, don't try and reach a goal. There isn't a goal there. The goal, because it isn't as if suddenly you've reached a masterpiece and you'll never make another artwork again. You don't retire as an artist. You die. You just keep making and exploring and finding new things and new interests along the way. And I think it's really important to diversity, to create a separation from the art market. That's not your job. A separation between the idea of a finished object of art, capital A, and what you do. Your job is to experiment. Your job is to play and struggle with this thing to try and understand visual language and what you have to say in that visual language. You have to have something to say. So if you're maybe a bit younger, I think it's important to look at the world around you. There's no such thing as the proper themes for art. The proper themes for art can be people on your street, your relatives, your brothers and sisters, the games you play. It doesn't matter. What matters is you find an engaging visual form to talk about them and what they might mean, because the bottom line is, for any artwork, is what does it mean? What is it talking about that is worthwhile talking about? And I think you can find that in anything, absolutely anything. You just have to care enough about it to want to wake up every day and spend hours and hours and hours addressing it, and to find you care about it enough that it keeps you excited to keep making.
Are you still doing that? I know, going back to the COVID thing, have you found that, and this is so important with students, or artists out there, trying to find their voice, trying to find like that ability to go in their studio and make art? Did it affect you at all? Have you been more productive? Has it changed?
No, it
your
hasn't
art?
changed, because I'm still working for the Chance Art Museum from home, mostly except one day a week. But I'm still holding regular hours during the day, and so at the end of the day, I can go in the studio, and then I have my regular studio days that I can go in. But my schedule hasn't essentially changed. I mean, for all of this, there's work to be done for the museum. There's shows to curate. There's things to organise, and there's stuff to do with Durden and Ray that needs some attention. Although other members are more active in that right now than I am. But my studio hours haven't really changed, and I don't. There's been I can see reflections of the COVID situation in certain elements or things that go into the paintings, but not overly so, because if my work is about living life, about being, about this existential existence of what counts is living and experiencing and having this performative life, as it were, that hasn't changed. And the fact that somebody myself might catch something and die hasn't changed the fact you still are living and need to live. For, if anything, in some ways, the idea that the paintings are essentially about mortality has made them more poignant, perhaps, because for myself, at least, I've had lots and lots of friends die over the last few months, including relatives. I've been to, I think, 3 or 4 funerals so far. I expect that to continue. Some of those are bike accidents, some of them are COVID, some of them were other health issues, because some of our brothers are getting older now. That reality of these people passing is part and parcel of the influence that goes into making it imperative to make the paintings. For me, it just makes it more poignant to make them, but it hasn't affected my output.
Which is amazing, because, just to give our audience kind of, once again, a quick little view, you're running a museum, you're both the director and the curator, which is 2 different jobs, but
Sure.
both very important, very difficult. We work together on the Sir Biannual, which is a bi-yearly show that's now going to go into its 12th year. We lost a friend together, you made time to really sort of support that, and I appreciate you coming in on that and really help making it happen, for, I guess, 8 years now. You have obligations, you have a absolutely brilliant and lovely wife that you have family obligations to.
Sure.
And so, it's important for a lot of our viewers is that there's a lot of life that goes on. Like I said earlier, when I talked about some of your sort of altruistic events, that, all these events that you put on, whether it's the mass attack, whether it was Ray, whether it was Collab, that all these amazing things, but you still find time to get in the studio. Just so people know, about how many hours a week do you actually, people sometimes, I get in 1 day a week and I'm very productive. What's your kind of...
I'm in there 1 day a week, essentially, and then some evenings. But I think, like most artists, I think about the work a lot. And so when I go in there, I'm prepped to get things done. And I work on multiple canvases at any given time. So I'm probably working on 3 or 4 large works at any given time, and maybe 20 smaller works at any given time. So there's a continuous movement of working from one to the next. And like I said, I think about it and make notes, etc. I think to be an artist, it's hard enough as it is. It's a struggle. There's lots of competition. There's very few opportunities. But if you want it enough and you're willing to be dedicated to it, and you wake up in the morning wanting to make art, hey, great, make it. Do those things to try and get the work seen, because it's important that it does get seen.
Well, how do you? Let's say for young artists, since I have you here, both as an artist. And it's so wonderful because I get to ask you as a curator, music director, how, maybe I know it's not quite about, this, but it's about who you are in your life. How do you recommend for young artists or even mid-career that just want to get, how to get into the LA art scene? You've been so successful at doing that.
Well, I think there's lots of ways. I think that being involved is the major thing in whatever ways. And I think some of those things are join alternative groups. They're wonderful. They're really supportive. They do great things. It's where most things kind of start. They are immensely networked, and it's a really, most of them are really chill and fun environments to work with. And there's a lot of them in LA. I think that you can start looking at those areas where there are open calls to get your work seen. I think you can apply, send stuff to if you go through and look on their websites, any galleries that don't have we do not accept submissions, which is most of them.
That's very important.
Yeah,
galleries sometimes get really angry.
They do. So if it says that, don't send them stuff. But like at the museum, Talents Art Museum, we have a policy that we look at everything. Everything that comes into us, we review.
So no matter what anybody sends you,
we review everything. And because what's a curator's job? A curator's job is to respond to art and to kind of see what's out there and be aware as much as it's possible of this many artists in the world. It's our job to see what somebody's doing and to kind of track things. And so we keep an open policy. Some other places keep an open policy.
And do you find? Do you actually pick? This is, I'm sure somebody's asking or not. I haven't seen it pop up, but I'm sure people are shy and thinking about this. Like, do you find work from?
Yes, on occasion, yeah. Actually, Cindy Wright just walked into the gallery I was a director of at one time and handed me a thing. And I reviewed it, and I really, really liked it. And 15 years later, or whatever it is now, 10, 15, years later, we're still friends. And she was in a show at the museum earlier this year because she makes great work. As the curator side tries to keep an open mind, the artist side, I just want to see things. I want to see as much visual stuff as I can because there's always something to learn from artwork. It's either stuff to learn that you want to take from, or it's what not to do. Both are valuable learning experiences. Go and see bad shows, go and see good ones, but go and see bad ones. Learn what not to do. I think if you're going to, one of the most potent things to do, I think, for an artist, and for two reasons, is to curate shows. And partly because it helps you network. It means that you are helping somebody show, and they're helping you by participating, so you establish a mutual bond. Often, the network working is great. Often better known artists are really open to taking part, as you know, because you've done shows in various places with better, established artists. And so you can kind of do those things, and it gives you your eye develops. The more you look, the more, particularly through curation, the more you develop an understanding of what you're looking at, what people are doing, the subtleties in work, which gives you a better eye. A better eye means you're going to make better work as an artist, I think. So all of those aspects, you can increase your own learning at the same time as you're increasing your own networking. At the same time, you're actually having it's hard work, but it's also engaging and enjoyable. You can come out of this like, yes, I did this thing, and I had a great time, and these artists feel really great about it, and all these people came and had this wonderful time, and I did that. And there's a great sense of pride in that, I think, and you can do that right from the beginning because there aren't any. There's not that many rules. If you can find a location, you can turn your front room into a gallery for a one-night opening. You can do it anywhere that you can find an empty office block, an empty storefront.
Well, we kind of
we've done this sort of thing.
It's a different time. We grew up with the living room,
sure,
right? Curator Jen Cattell had at Bergamot. Remember, she had the phone booth.
That's right.
And had a thing. She also had a dollhouse,
Yep.
all gallery in an actual dollhouse.
Yep.
Marilee Cherry, who's now a big fixture in LA.
That garage thing.
She started in a garage. She started to be part of what my business partner Martin and I felt we allowed a lot of young curators to come in and do great curating, who went on to do great things. But yeah, she started curating. That's what people forget. I have a student, Lydia Espinoza, she's probably out there, and she's worked it with programs with you. She's been part of the Surbiannual and curated here. And right now she's running a projection during COVID. How did she, and I think you were a big influence with alternative spaces and things like that, where she's doing projections right now. And I thought that was just brilliant. And I love that one of my gallery students have gone on to work with you a little bit and now have curated both small local museums, work for great galleries, right? And now sort of creating these alternative spaces. Finding that exciting kind of way to get out there and do what you love, which is so important, especially now, at least for me, where it's so easy to, with everything that's going on in the world, COVID, politics, to get sort of caught up in the bad bubble to create something exciting and great.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a long time for these things to happen anyway. So with COVID being the bubble we're in at the moment, you've got plenty of time to really develop a number of really cool curatorial projects organised by you as an artist or as a young curator. It's a good time to be able to put those together. There are venues that are art-based venues, but there's other venues you can use. There's going to be a lot of empty space in Los Angeles when this clears, and somebody's going to have to do something with it. So perhaps that's a great time to get in there and use that outcome, if you like, find a use for those spaces in curatorial stuff. Social media means that we no longer have to find the money to do postage and all this other stuff that we used to have to do back in the day. So you can run these things very cheaply now, to do. So this is a terrible time, but all times come with opportunities, and I think that for artists, this is an opportunity to push on with your artwork. It's an opportunity for young curator artists, artist curators, to kind of develop some ideas. It's a good time to be proactive, online, and supportive. This is never going to be easy, but if you want this, the best way ahead is to be that proactive person, to try and make things better for yourself and try and make things better for other people. It's all part. I don't believe in karma, but I do believe in leaving the situation better than you came to.
I was going to say, if somebody doesn't believe in karma, that's a very sort of karma theme that you've really done a lot. And I know we're out of time, and I know there might be questions out there, and I encourage you, please even send questions. We can answer them digitally. Both myself and Max have a nice online presence. So please always feel free to ask questions, send them to us. But I need to thank a few people. First, I'd like to thank you, Max. I really appreciate you coming out, putting this show. I gotta thank Abby and Wendy for coordinating all this. This just would not happen. Our Dean Grant, who is built this whole set for us, with the lights, and has been running this. And the gallery we'd be closed if it wasn't for having a great dean that was fighting, and our acting president, Teresa Dreyfus, who had the wisdom and the kindness to see that how important this is for the community, and to allow me to reopen, under sort of new COVID guidelines. So, but we can still do this and still reach so many people and the artist community. And I just thought it was too important to just let it, kind of what you're talking about, let it go dark, that we need to still move on and try and help people and influence people. And I think the show is amazing. I encourage you guys to go online. We have a wonderful, you could go see all the images online, and they're really shot well. So that's really neat. And feel free to email us with questions and responses, and we'll get back to you right away.
Yeah, we do.
On that note, thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll hopefully see you for the next one.